Hey everyone, time for another Animator on Animation, and I'm your host animator, Tom Fremgen. This time we're going to take a look at one of the oddest Disney animated television shows, Gargoyles. I say oddest because whoever thought Disney would make such a show? I mean, let's face it, Disney's bread and butter is cute and cuddly. Heck, their first television shows were Gummy Bears and the Wuzzles. But don't get me wrong. As they were building up their Disney afternoon programming block, they did have adventure shows, but they were all done in the typical Disney style. DuckTales, Chippendales Rescue Rangers, Tailspin, and even Darkwing Duck are all very Disney-esque. But Gargoyles? That was about as non-Disney-esque as you can get, as the show took place, for all intended purposes, in the real world. And while it was originally pitched as a comedy adventure, because who would pitch anything else to Disney? It basically became Disney's answer to Warner Brothers' Batman the Animated Series. All right, now, enough history. Let's fire up the VHS and jump back to 1994. Okay, here's a fight scene with the villainous robots, the Iron Clan.
You take the others. I'll handle the leader.
And this is just great stuff. In fact, all the Disney afternoon shows look great. It's really no surprise that when Disney finally got around to making cartoons for TV, they would be better than just about anybody else's. I mean, when Gargoyles came out, Universal Studios was making Monster Force. And there's just no comparison, is there? There are basically two main ingredients when it comes to good-looking television animation. One, money, and two, the availability of the overseas animation studio's A-team. As I've mentioned before, nearly all American television animation is actually animated in other countries. Japan, Korea, China, India. This cost-saving measure started in the 1970s. But if you wanted the foreign studio's best, you had to pay extra. And even then, you had to hope their best animators weren't already booked to work on something else, because everyone was looking to get their shows animated at the same time. Clearly, Disney's bigger wallet gave them an edge, though. I mean, just look at this. It's basically perfect. The models are sharp, the animation flows, the backgrounds are awesome, and the timing, which was done by Disney, is near perfect as well. What's timing, you ask? Well, basically, animation is timing. Anyone can make something move, but understanding the time it takes something to move, based on the object and why the object is moving, is what determines the timing. And more often than not, that timing determines how believable the illusion of life, if you will, is. Now, in the old days of TV animation, the director or the animation director would determine the timing of a scene with the ever-popular X-sheets. This, plus the storyboards and layout, would go to the animator, and they'd get to work. But nowadays, the American director is too busy, if you can believe it, and has almost no contact with the overseas animators. And of course, the animation directors work for the overseas studios, and they have basically no contact with the American studios either, so to speak. Sometimes there's an in-house American producer helping oversee everything, but that's like one person keeping tabs on 13 to 65 episodes. So in an attempt to bridge this gap, the timer was created, which is basically a person who makes X-sheets these days. Now, you may have heard the term slugging when it comes to timing, as slugging is figuring out the time in between dialogue, which obviously has a set amount of time. This is mostly used to determine the entire length of a show, and is often done by the directors or even the storyboard artist. But actual timing goes into how many drawings are needed to raise a character's arm, or have them run across a room, or even something to blow up. I feel I should point out that these are base descriptions, as every studio kind of has their own spin on things. Now, if a studio is lucky, the timer is an animator as well. If they're unlucky, the timer is someone who just memorized a formula on how things move. because there's really no fix for bad timing. Now getting back to this scene, it's simply awesome. The storyboarding is really gutsy. There's just no fear of bad animation as the characters twist around and move back and forth from camera. If they had any rules like don't have a character move like this or that because it's too hard or expensive, I can't detect it. That little bit of Lexington landing on the torch, that's just great. It's a nice bit of character acting showing how he just managed to survive the fight. Just great work all around. Speaking of storyboards, watching the credits, one name jumped out at me: Karl Gnass. I mention him because I don't think fandom is too aware of him or how famous he is in the industry. He made his street cred as a Disney storyboard artist, but where he really took off was in teaching life drawing. You see, if you want to get into animation, even computer animation, you need to study the hell out of life drawing. And Karl is one of the 2 greatest living figure artist teachers. You can look Karl up online and even take classes with him. He's been teaching at the Animation Guild for years, boards as well as life drawing. While I'm sure he doesn't know me from Adam, I've been lucky enough to study under him a couple of times, and he's amazing. Now, he might think I'm bad-mouthing him here, but if you're a beginner, I don't really recommend seeking him out, because he really gets into the philosophy of drawing and the reasons for drawing something. You see, you just don't draw something because it's there. So I feel if you don't have a good starting foundation, you might be a little confused with his method. But check him out and decide for yourself. It's really hard to find a person so well respected in the industry who doesn't actually make cartoons anymore than Karl Gnass. Okay, let's check out another fight scene with the introduction of Macbeth. And this is, this is just really off. The perspective of this net is all wrong. Instead of being draped over Lexington and Bronx, it's just flatly painted on top of them. I guess it just goes to show that even Disney couldn't make every episode perfect. This episode was animated by Wang Films, which was one of the first overseas studios Hanna-Barbera ever used. And they are just not getting it. So what's basically going wrong here is A, bad models. It's a perfect example of not drawing on model. Sure, it looks like the characters, but when you compare it to the model packs, they're all too soft and cartoony looking. Reminds me of an old piece of advice given to artists trying to get on a show. Never draw the characters from that show. Draw stuff like it or just show work from a different show, but don't draw the stuff from the show that you're trying out for. The reason is the people working on that show really know how those characters should look, and you do not. So all they're going to see are the flaws in your drawing. So wait until you're given a test to show them how well you can draw the characters, because then they'll be more forgiving. Yikes. What happened to Elisa's head there? Now the other thing going wrong here is B, just lazy animation. Possibly a timing issue too. Are they getting enough time for these actions? But let's slow down some of this animation and, yep, characters are just popping from pose to pose. And some of this in-betweening is like the artists just don't care. Look at Goliath turn here. Pop, turned around. This shot bugs me too. The characters walk behind a beam for like no reason, aside from making it hard to see them. The setup used it to good effect, to show off an interesting location, but to go back to it and just leave it there in the middle of the shot? What the heck for? I'd be very surprised if that was in the storyboards. And why did Goliath fall down here? This scene of Goliath jumping? What the heck? He jumps up and then somehow manages to rotate without continuing the direction of his jump. Now, to be fair, a lot of these guys are overworked and dealing with killer deadlines, so let's try to be not too hard on them. Overall, this kind of reminds me of the point I made earlier about some shows having do and don't rules for the storyboard artists, because they don't want the boards to be too hard for the animators. So here, Team Disney is aiming for the fence, and Team Wang just isn't up to the challenge. And what's up with that hand? That's just lazy work. Okay, let's look at one more episode. Check out this character animation of Broadway. It's just ballsy to have a character jump around like that, especially in 1994. Holy shit. Holy shit. Did I see what I thought I saw? Damn, son. This is why, art aside, Gargoyles is still remembered today. They just had one main character shoot another main character. This kind of stuff never happened back then. Hell, it barely happens today. Most American animation today is made for kids' cable channels. And they ain't letting something like this happen, despite it being a great teaching moment and story beat as well. Getting into more typical animation, animated by Jade Animation, this is how Gargoyles should look.
What? No! You can't kill him! You think not? Elisa will have her revenge through me.
But he didn't shoot Elisa. I did.
What?
It was an accident.
Now let's take a moment to check out these backgrounds. Just great work. I mean, you can quibble here and there, but most of them are just stunning. While Batman the Animated Series went for minimalistic style, Gargoyles just went for bam, in-your-face gorgeous. And it's so much work, so much work. I'm often torn over backgrounds like this, because while I frickin' love them, they're only on camera for a few seconds at best. And is it really worth all that work? Obviously, it depends on the producers and the money people, but as I mentioned, Batman did just as well without that much work. But then again, this is why Gargoyles is such a benchmark show. Now, before I wrap this up, I want to point out a few other talents on the crew, like creator Greg Weisman, who would work on a bunch of great shows like The Spectacular Spider-Man and Young Justice. Producer Frank Parr, a great storyboard artist who's worked on shows like G.I. Joe, The Real Ghostbusters, Batman the Animated Series, Men in Black, Spawn, X-Men Evolution, and a ton more. And the head writer, Michael Reeves, with, at the time, his wife, Brian. He got his start at Filmation and has written on just about every show you can think of. Overall, Gargoyles had a murderer's row of talented people. And backed by Disney money, while ducking FCC network rules by being a syndicated show, it's no wonder it's as frickin' good as it is. Well, that's enough for now. Thanks so much for spending some time with me, appreciating and learning about animation. And if you enjoyed yourself, please like and subscribe, because my fragile little ego just can't take that kind of rejection. And be sure to let me know what animation I should look at next. Now, if you excuse me, I'm off to stick the VHS player back under the bed. Out of the way, cat.